Welcome to the WTR Healthcare Happenings podcast. I'm your host, Tim Gerdeman, Vice Chair and Co-founder and Chief Marketing Officer of Water Tower Research. In today's episode, I'm pleased to welcome back Anthony Tennyson, CEO of Solvonis Therapeutics, London Stock Exchange ticker symbol SVNS. Also joining us is my Water Tower Research Equity Research colleague, Robert Sassoon. This conversation is the first installment of a two-part series on Solvonis. Today's discussion with Anthony will be followed by a part two feature next week with Solvonis' Chief Scientific Advisor, Professor David Nutt. Solvonis Therapeutics is a clinical stage biopharmaceutical company focused on developing innovative small molecule therapeutics for high burden CNS disorders with an initial focus across addiction and psychiatry. The company is advancing a differentiated portfolio spanning a late-stage lead asset, a U.S.-focused mid-clinical program, and a broader proprietary discovery pipeline designed to provide near, mid, and long-term value creation opportunities. Without further ado, Anthony and Robert, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Tim.
Thank you, Tim. Great to be here again.
Anthony, we had you on the podcast last November, and a lot has changed since that time around Solvonis' strategy for its lead program, SVN-001. Before we dive into that, can you remind listeners what SVN-001 is, how it's designed to work, and why you believe it is such an important asset for the company?
Yeah, more than happy to. That's a great question. Good to talk to you again. Good to talk to your audience. So SVN-001, it is a innovative therapeutic for the treatment of severe alcohol use disorder, targeting the UK market initially and the EU market thereafter. And severe alcohol use disorder is the worst form of alcohol use disorder. And unfortunately, probably for your audience's benefit, there's probably very few people's lives who haven't been touched by alcohol use disorder. Certainly where I'm from, but probably from where most people are from. So it's a disease that affects many millions of people. The current standard of care is very poor. So for us, that means there's a large commercial opportunity and a large addressable market. So what we're doing is we're repurposing. And so we're very pleased. We're focused on repurposing, which reduces timelines, reduces costs, and reduces risks. So we're repurposing an already approved medication in ketamine, and we're pairing that with copywritten, manualized relapse prevention, cognitive behavioral therapy. It's a very efficient treatment cycle. So 3 ketamine dosing sessions, bookended either side by therapy sessions. So prep session, ketamine session, integration session, same week 1, week 2, week 3. So across 18 to 20 hours delivered in an outpatient site treatment environment, we've managed to achieve significant improvements against the current standard of care as evidenced in a phase 2 trial. So the phase 2 trial was run in the UK. It was fully funded by the UK state. Pre-trial people coming into that trial were abstinent 2% of the time. So Tim, that means they were sober 7 days a year. Those that went through the active arm of the trial achieved on average 86% abstinence in the 6 months post-treatment. So it's a radical improvement from pre to post-treatment. We also saw a statistically significant reduction in heavy drinking days, active versus placebo. So what we're doing is we're developing potentially a new treatment pathway for severe alcohol use disorder, which is a disease that affects millions of people with a very poor current standard of care and a large addressable market. And we're doing that, we're innovating by treating both the physical and the psychosocial elements of that disease.
Those results you just mentioned are rather remarkable. Congratulations. And as I established with you last time on the podcast, I'm on the same page with you that the total addressable market globally is massive. So moving on, Anthony, having reminded us what SVN-001 is, the next obvious question is why the board has now chosen to retain more of that value. And in the fiscal 2025 results, Solvonis moved away from an earlier stage out-licensing route and toward prioritizing completion of phase 3. What most drove that change in strategy, and how should investors be thinking about it mainly as a change in market backdrop or as a stronger internal conviction in the asset itself?
I think it's both of those things, Tim. When we look at where we are, probably what I didn't mention in my first answer is we're in phase 3 for SVN-001. That trial is co-funded by us and the UK Department of Health. The total ticket price of the trial is about 2.5 million sterling. We're co-contributing with the UK Department of Health. So in the grand scheme of things for a phase 3, it's relatively efficient, and we're in the middle of that trial. So with the backdrop of the change in temperature, atmosphere in the US for psychedelic and psychedelic adjacent treatments, particularly with Trump's recent executive order, we believe that there is significantly more value available to shareholders at the end of that phase 3. And like I said, we're in the middle of the phase 3. We're expecting a data readout. We're expecting recruitment to complete in 27, a data readout in 28, and potentially a market authorization application in the UK in 29. So given the change in temperature in the room for psychedelic and psychedelic adjacent treatments, certainly in the US, and given the proximity we are to a significant data readout, the board's view is that there's more value available if we hold on to the program and see it through to the end of phase 3. And I think also then from a sort of a macro environment as to why it should be interesting to US investors, when we look at our listed peers in the US, so that's the MindMed or the Definiums of this world, the Helices of this world, Atai's, GH, most of those companies are bringing their programs through to or are planning to bring their programs through to the end of phase 3, if not potentially beyond. And it's not lost on us the significant difference in valuation between us and our American listed peers. So across those two or three strands, the board is of the belief that greater shareholder value creation is available if we hold on to the program through to the end of phase 3, as I mentioned before.
Understood. Speaking of valuation, since you just brought that up, I'm going to brush off my former sell-side analyst hat for a moment and ask you one question before I turn it over to Robert. So if I step back from individual programs for a moment, why should a U.S. investor be focused on Solvonis right now? You have a phase 3 lead asset, a U.S.-focused mid-clinical program, and an emerging discovery pipeline, yet the company is trading well below many U.S.-listed CNS peers. What do you think investors are missing at this moment?
So probably there's a frictional issue. American investors don't really understand London, which is understandable. But it's a demand and supply issue in London. There are relatively few small cap healthcare investors in London compared to in New York. So there is less capital seeking opportunities. So the market prices are naturally lower. So I think what that should mean to US investors is those US investors who are comfortable buying stock for tickers outside the US, they might want to look at us. We would be, you could look at us as a ground floor opportunity for some US investors when we're trading at, in and around 20 million sterling. If we were in New York, it would probably be potentially higher than that. And I think then for a sort of a medium to longer term viewpoint for US investors, our chairman, Dennis Purcell, he's a New Yorker. He says he's Irish, but he's really a New Yorker. He ran the healthcare franchise for Hamilton Quist before it was bought by JP. He set up H&Q Week, which is now JP Week. He founded and was chairman of Aisling Capital, which is a New York specialist healthcare VC. So he knows New York. And so our plan certainly would be, over the medium to long term, is to seek a NASDAQ listing for Solvonis so that we can catch up with our New York listed peers.
Based on my white hair, I remember the name H&Q very, very well. And thanks, and I appreciate that clarity. That's a very common problem we hear from foreign listed companies trying to access U.S. pools of capital, rather. So, Robert?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. And Anthony, let's stay with SVN001. Now that the company is clearly positioning it as the lead near-term value inflection point, how should investors think about phase 3 progress today? And are you still broadly tracking toward enrollment completion in late 27 and readout in 2028? And what are the key operational milestones people should be watching out for?
Yeah, I think in my long-winded and rambling answers before that, Robert, I probably answered some of that already, so I do apologize. Yeah, so recruitment is ongoing and is progressing. We're absolutely on track to complete recruitment in mid to late 27, and then a data readout in mid to late 2028. And the reason for the delay between completion of recruitment or enrollment and a data readout is there's a 6-month observation window post-treatment. So the treatment cycle is about 3 to 4 weeks, and it's 6 months post that, and that's when we'll be able to lock the trial and begin the data analysis. So things are progressing as planned. The timeline is probably taking longer than a true commercial trial, but a true commercial trial would cost 10 times what we're currently paying. And the trial is funded by the UK state. It's been run in the NHS research. For our American audience, that's the UK public healthcare system, which is the second largest purchaser of healthcare services on the planet. So they're actually running the trial for us. And that's really helpful for us because it means about 60% of the KOLs, key opinion leaders, in alcohol use disorder treatment in the UK are actively involved in the trial in one shape or another. So things are progressing really well. From an operational update basis, we're limited in how much, if anything, we can really report through the course of the trial because it's funded by us and the UK Department of Health. There are certain restrictions on what can and can't be said, so we won't be able to provide midterm data readouts, etc., for fear of breaking the blind, but also because it's part public funded and part private funded.
Got it. Just before I go to the next question, just an add-on to that, can you remind us what the target recruitment numbers are for?
Yes. So it's targeted as an N equals 280 person, 2-armed, active placebo-controlled trial. So that's what the target is, and we are progressing appropriately through the recruitment.
Okay, got it. So turning to SVN002, this gives Solvonis exposure to the US moderate to severe AUD market, which is larger than the TRD market that J&J is addressing with Spravato. So given that Spravato has already helped establish the regulatory, clinical, and commercial infrastructure for esketamine, how should investors think about the opportunity for SVN002 in the market, where you may be able to build on an existing foundation rather than create the category from scratch?
Yeah, so maybe if I could just bring it up a level and talk about zero 002. Why do we have 2 alcohol use disorder treatment programs? So in the UK and the EU, from a repurposing perspective, you can apply for something called a mixed full application, where you can bring your own data, so data you've generated yourself, and then use reference information available from the literature. So not from third-party companies, but from the literature. And if you are successful, then you get about up to 10 years regulatory data protection on your clinical data. So in our case, if we're successful, that would be 10 years data protection on our phase 2 and our phase 3 data, which we believe would be sufficient time for whomever, us or another party, to build a decent franchise for this new treatment pathway in the UK and potentially the EU. That level of protection isn't available with the 001 asset in the US. So you'd be looking at, if we were to bring that forward in the US, probably about only 1 year regulatory data protection, which isn't sufficient to build an appropriate franchise. So we needed something with a better IP profile for the US market. So we identified a completed phase 1 S-ketamine repurposing program, where a German company was repurposing J&J's Spravato from a nasal spray to an oral thin film for sublingual and buccal delivery. They'd filed formulation patents. We licensed that program or that asset. We tested it in humans. That enabled us to file method of use patents. So we believe that those patents should be recognized in the Orange Book, and that would provide us with up to 5.5 years potentially regulatory data protection for our data in the US, even though we're going through a repurposing or a 505(b)(2) program. So that's why we have 2 programs. And that second program is 002, targeting moderate to severe alcohol use disorder in the US market, which, as you mentioned, Robert, is, we believe, 4 times larger than the depression market. There's 15,000 clinics registered with SAMHSA for the treatment of alcohol use disorder. So the market, we believe the market is there, the distribution platform is there. You compare that with J&J's Spravato. So that's S-ketamine as a nasal spray. S-ketamine is the more active enantiomer in racemic ketamine for what we want to do. So there's obviously benefits to the patient in a lower drug load because we only need the S enantiomer. But they had to make the market because it was a brand new treatment paradigm for depression. So nasal spray, people had to stay in a clinic and be observed for 2 hours. Depression is typically treated for 15 minutes with your doctor or your psychiatrist, and you take an SSRI at home. And so despite that, They've now built that into a fairly successful franchise. So what we're looking to do is we're looking to build on that foundation, 505(b)(2) into J&J's Spravato, into a market that's 4 times the size, with a treatment platform, let's just say, or a delivery platform in the clinics that's already established for a disease where people are more used to treating people over extended periods of time. And so in order to I think, reduce any potential payer friction. Again, we're designing our program to follow in along behind those already established CPT codes. So larger market, larger indication, an already established distribution platform or go-to-market platform using the same CPT codes, but potentially with similar level of efficacy as our 002 program. We think that that's quite an interesting proposition.
Yeah, and it's certainly a great benefit to market a new drug in something that in an infrastructure that already exists.
Yep.
So you've already had a positive FDA pre-IND feedback for SVN002, and as you mentioned, you're pursuing a 505(b)(2) pathway. What did that interaction establish? What are the key remaining steps needed to move the program towards phase 2? And how should investors think about SVN002 strategically within the broader Solvonis portfolio?
Yes, so Awaken Life Sciences that Solvonis acquired mid last year. Awaken Life Sciences had a pre-IND meeting with the FDA in December 2024. The FDA agreed that Solvonis, now I beg your pardon, that Awaken, now Solvonis, could indeed 505(b)(2) into J&J's Spravato once the bridge was established. So the bridge to move from a nasal route of administration to an oral route of administration needed to establish the bridge. So we are now we've taken that program over from Awaken through the acquisition, and we are now working to establish the bridge. We're doing that across 2 work packages, PK/PD, and then potentially tox. And what we're looking to do is measure and confirm that Tmax and AUC for S-ketamine and its 2 major metabolites of noresketamine and hydroxynoresketamine are within range, delivered sublingually versus being delivered intranasally. We are expecting to have that bridge established in the course, probably through Q3 this year. And then thereafter, we would tend to submit an IND with the agency for a phase 2B program.
Yeah, great. So one of the things that makes the Solvonis story a little bit more compelling today is that it's no longer looks like a one-trick pony, and it's not a single asset story. You now have SVN001 as a late-stage lead program, SVN002 as a US-focused mid-clinical opportunity, but you also got a broader discovery pipeline behind them. How intentional has that portfolio construction been, and how do you want investors to think about near, mid, and long-term value creation across the company?
Yeah, well, that's been a very, very intentional strategic decision by us. We focused initially on repurposing, so repurposing racemic ketamine with 001 to reduce risk, time, getting to inflection points rapidly. And again, repurposing 002, but with a better IP profile for a much larger market than for Europe, providing us with a midterm significant value creation opportunity. And then long-term, the intent is to stick very strictly to a traditional biotech model, developing our own molecules to provide long-term value creation opportunities. So I think you could view us as a sort of I don't know, maybe a platform play in the addiction and the psychiatry space with multiple opportunities for value creation, and as you say, multiple shots on goal. And I think what that means for investors is you look at us today, and I believe we're undervalued. Certainly, you compare us to our US peers. Many of our US peers in the psychedelics or psychedelics adjacent space are, to a greater or lesser extent, repurposing already well-established or well-known drugs. Yes, they haven't been approved already, but they've been around for a while. And then they're also reinvesting in novel compounds further back in the pipeline. So I think from an investor perspective, have a look at us. There's a significant value differential between us, or difference between us and our US listed peers. We're not a one-trick pony. We've got multiple assets, and we've got an opportunity, or we certainly have a plan to create value over the long term.
Right. So beyond the 2 alcohol use disorder programs, Solvonis has also started to build a broader proprietary CNS pipeline, including SVN-114 in PTSD and SVN 015 in stimulant use disorder and depression. So, what
Mhm.
early evidence gives you confidence these programs could become meaningful future value drivers? And what does that say about the capital efficiency and strategic depth of the platform Solvonis is building?
So, SVN 114, we look and we applaud and very, very admire very much the great work that MAPS, Lycos, and now Resilient have done to date on the use of MDMA assisted therapy for the treatment of post-traumatic stress disorder. And post-traumatic stress disorder, it's a horrible disease, affects about 17 million people in the US, and counterintuitively, the majority of people that suffer with PTSD isn't from battlefield. It's from abuse, neglect during their formative years, and very often sexual abuse. And the current treatment approach for PTSD is to get people to relive those traumatic experiences, and the body and the mind reacts in the same way to reliving the experience and the memory as when it was first inflicted. So that's a trauma, repeated trauma, people being repeatedly exposed to the trauma, and that's very challenging. And therapy is very often not effective for people, and there are significant downstream negative effects for people. So what MDMA does is it dampens down that fight or flight response, boosts the empathy response, and enables people to engage more effectively with therapy. But as we saw with the FDA wasn't wholly convinced with some of the science and maybe with the approach. And there's also some issues around MDMA, around IP, brand, safety. It gets metabolized into MDA that has a slight heart risk. Um, and there also is obviously a well-established abuse potential because it's very popular recreationally. And what I don't think many people in the psychedelic space, maybe they do, but in Awaken, we ran some ketamine clinics. And it's hard to, even with ketamine, which is 90 minutes, it's still hard to make money with consultant-led psychedelic assisted psychotherapy from a scheduling, real estate, people expense basis. When you're looking at people being in a room for 6 to 8 hours with LSD, psilocybin, MDMA, that can be going to be hard to commercialize. So with all of that context, we sought to develop a novel, short-acting, less intense version of MDMA. And that's what we've developed with SVN 114. It's a serotonin, dopamine, noradrenaline releaser, similar profiles to MDMA, but on a much lower intensity, so therefore a lower abuse potential. Novel scaffold, composition of matter patents filed, and freedom to operate checks, so better IP profile. Better safety profile because it doesn't get metabolized into MDA. Soft drug design, so it metabolizes quicker and washes out quicker, and we'll probably develop it with a way to get into the bloodstream quicker. So what we've done is we've applaud what everyone's done with MDMA, but we've looked to improve on that from a safety, IP, abuse potential basis, safety basis, to enable people to get the benefits of MDMA-assisted psychotherapy or entactogen psychotherapy, but in something that's going to be, we believe, safer, better profile, better IP profile, and better unit economics potentially in the clinic. So that's where we are with that one. We are seeking out grant funding opportunities to progress the 114 program through to IND enabling studies and ultimately an IND as part of our strict focus on CapEx. And then similarly with 015, that is a selective serotonin and dopamine reuptake inhibitor. So SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. This is a serotonin and dopamine reuptake inhibitor. Serotonin and dopamine are the receptors that methamphetamine and cocaine bind with. If you block those, you can't get a buzz, you'll get a heart impact, but you won't get a psychological impact. Again, completely novel. Composition of matter patents filed, freedom to operate checks completed. That's in with NIDA on their accelerated drug development program for methamphetamine and for cocaine addiction. And we also believe that has optionality or utility in depression. And again, for depression and for methamphetamine and cocaine addiction, we're seeking grant funding to progress those programs forward. So I think, in summary, to a long answer to your question, but we've got near medium terms where we're deploying capital and the board are deploying capital in those. Preclinical program, very exciting, traditional composition of matter patents in place, pointed out some high burden, poorly served indications, seeking grant funding to progress them forward in order to be judicious with our use of capital.
Thanks for all that. As investors look out over the next 12 to 24 months, what should they expect in terms of development cadence across SVN001, SVN002, and the broader pipeline? And given Solvonis's capital efficient operating model, which you've very concisely talked about, how are you balancing internal capability with external CRO and academic and strategic partners to execute efficiently?
Okay. So let's just say that over the next 24 months, what we could expect would be a data readout for 001 phase 3. Sorry, completion of recruitment or enrollment for 001 phase 3 and a data readout for phase 3 001, just depending upon how far into the year we get. For 002, through the course of this year, would be the establishment of the bridge between 002 and J&J Spravato. It would be towards the end of the year or early next year, would be, depending upon the timing of the establishment of that bridge, would be a submission of an IND to the FDA. And in that would be request for an approval for a phase 2B program. We would be hoping that might be potentially one of the two definitive studies, but that will depend upon engagement with the agency. And then through the course of the remaining 18 months thereafter, thereabouts, will be progression of that program. That's again subject to the availability of capital, I should say. And then for 114, 015, and both indications for 015 would be progressing, would be securing further grant funding from US, EU, or UK bodies and progressing those programs forward, ideally to IND enabling studies. And then to the second part of your question, how do we find, because we run as a virtual biotech, lean central team. That means our research is outsourced, nothing new there. But yes, it has its opportunities for improvement. If I had hair, I probably would be pulling out some of my hair with some things, but it's puts and takes. If you wanted to have full control, you got to have a lab, you got to have a team, you got a massive burn, and that increases a whole load of other challenges and reduces your flexibility. So the model that we have right now is absolutely fit for purpose for a company of our size and a company of our valuation. There are times where it is frustrating dealing with government bodies, just like there's times where it's frustrating dealing with international CROs. But it would be more worrisome if I had a burn of 2 million a month, right? So that's, or 1 million a month. So I think, on the balance overall, we have things absolutely set up the right way to create value today, tomorrow, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months time.
Certainly got a lot of things on the plate and a lot of ball juggling there, but you seem to be sort of managing it pretty well from what you've just told us. So if we bridge the next 12 to 18 months, there are several possible value drivers across the business. Continued phase 3 execution in SVN001, progression of SVN002 towards the clinic, further development of SVN114 and SVN015, and an evolving US backdrop for innovative CNS assets. Which of these do you think are the most important potential re-rating catalysts for Solvonis, and what should investors be watching most closely?
I know you asked me for one, but I'm going to say there's significant three re-rating catalysts for the company. It's data readout, phase 3, 001. It's establishing, it's initiating a US phase 2B for 002, which gives us footprint and sort of resonance with potential US investors. And then ultimately speaking, it's a capital markets. It would be getting access to New York in whichever way we could. And if the timing on those would probably be, and this is appropriately caveated, right? So this is with a crystal ball or a magic wand. So things may not happen, but it would be initiating the phase 2 for 002 to give us a story that's relevant to US investors or to US folk. Then it would be seeking to get a US listing, and then it would be the data readout on the phase 3 for 001. So to me, if I was able to, click my heels together or find a fairy godmother and wish for things, that's the sequence of events that I would want, and I believe those are the true catalysts for the company, a re-rating catalyst for the company.
Wishing you every success on that account. So finally, with the board now clearly focused on creating value through phase 3 completion in SVN-001, while also progressing SVN-002 and the broader pipeline, capital allocation becomes especially important. How is the board thinking about financing the business in a way that supports execution while preserving as much shareholder upside as possible?
Yes. So I think as I've mentioned before, the we will the preclinical programs we will be progressing, seeking grant funding to progress those. They're relatively speaking higher risk, and I think it's but very strong high potential programs, but relatively higher risk. So in the medium term, we're going to seek grant funding to progress those forward in order to preserve our capital and focus our capital on our clinical stage assets. And of the 2 clinical stage programs, we're going to prioritize funding the lead program, 001, through to a data readout, because that's what the nearest term, or the most meaningful catalyst for the business is. So I think it's really where we're focusing on, is prioritizing 001, progressing 002 in a sensible manner, and only progressing the preclinical assets through grant funding, until such time as we're able to access New York capital and things become probably slightly easier.
So, linked to that, how do you think about the trade-off between dilution and value creation? Put simply, at what point does the board believe that the value created by carrying SVN-001 through phase 3 more than justifies the capital required to get there?
Well, unlike most biotechnology companies in phase 3, our phase 3 is relatively inexpensive. It's a 280-person trial. Run commercially, that would cost somewhere between 25 to 35 million sterling. That's being conservative. In the US, it would be more than that. And that would be something that would be impossible for a company of our size to undertake. And the dilution to undertake that would be unpalatable. We're in a unique position because we've partnered with the UK state, the UK Department of Health, to co-fund the trial. The cost to us is lower, and it's been run in NHS research. So again, the cost is relatively low. So as I mentioned earlier on in the interview of the podcast, the total ticket price for the trial is about 2.5 million sterling. So actually, there isn't a significant amount more capital required to get us from where we are today to the end of phase 3 and to that data readout. So that trade-off is one that we as a company are more than happy with.
That's amazing. So, thank you, Anthony, for keeping us abreast of these fascinating developments at Solvonis, and we're definitely going to continue to monitor that. And I'm going to pass it back to Tim.
Thanks, Robert.
Thanks,
Appreciate
Robert. Anthony, thanks. Oh, sorry, I just spoke over you.
it. That's okay.
Oh,
I was just thanking Robert for the great questions and the good interaction.
yes, and I was going to thank you for coming back on. We're looking forward to part 2 of this podcast next week with your Chief Scientific Officer. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention one thing before we stop this podcast. Something you said that really I think was fascinating and really important is how you referenced that you're a platform play, not a one-trick pony. I think that's a really key differentiator for investors. So thanks again for pointing that out, and have a great day.
Great. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you for listening, and don't forget to subscribe, as well as visiting www.watertowerresearch.com to stay up to speed on the company's small cap written research reports, podcasts, fireside chats, industry-specific symposiums, and conference schedules. We will see you next time for another edition of the WTR Healthcare Happenings podcast. Finally, a special thanks to the producer and editor of the podcast, Krista Fitzpatrick.